In the past, when people talked about global superpowers, the usual names came up: America, China, Russia, and maybe some of Europe. Southeast Asia, often overlooked. And the Philippines? Hardly ever mentioned beyond tourism, call centers, or overseas workers. But something has shifted in 2025. Beneath the headlines and behind closed doors, a quiet storm has been brewing in the Pacific. Western intelligence agencies, military strategists, and political analysts are suddenly turning their eyes to Manila, and not just with interest, but with concern. Because the Philippines, long seen as dependent on foreign powers, is beginning to chart its own course. And it's doing so with unexpected confidence. Geographically, the Philippines is no longer just near the South China Sea. It is now central to the power dynamics shaping the entire Indo-Pacific. Economically, it's emerging as a new hub for global manufacturing and tech, challenging the dominance of countries like Vietnam and even creeping up on China's former edge. Militarily, it's not just hosting U.S. bases anymore. It's arming itself, signing new defense pacts, and running joint drills with powers like Japan, India, and Australia. But here's what's making the West nervous. This isn't just happening because the U.S. wants it. This is happening because the Philippines wants it. A new generation of bold, nationalist leaders. A tech-savvy, globally aware youth population. A country no longer content with being a silent ally or a passive observer. The Philippines is becoming unpredictable, independent, assertive, and that's exactly what terrifies the West. We'll uncover the 10 reasons why the Western world is quietly, but seriously, worried about the rise of the Philippines in 2025. From strategic geography to military modernization, economic resilience to political independence, the pieces are moving, and the Philippines is no longer on the sidelines. Welcome to the story they don't want you to hear. The strategic geography that terrifies superpowers. The Philippines isn't just a cluster of islands. It's a geopolitical nerve center, strategically sandwiched between the Pacific Ocean and the South China Sea. It sits on one of the busiest maritime corridors on the planet. Every year, over $3 trillion worth of trade passes through this region. Whoever controls this area has influence over global shipping, energy supply lines, and even military movements. This isn't lost on Western military planners. To the north lies Taiwan, a potential flashpoint between the U.S. and China. Just west are Chinese-occupied reefs and militarized islands. To the east, the U.S. military bases in Guam and Okinawa stand like sentinels of American power. And right in the middle, the Philippines, a natural launch pad for power projection, defense, or disruption. That's why the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, EDCA, was expanded in 2023, giving the U.S. access to 9 military bases across the archipelago. But even that isn't enough to ease Washington's anxiety. Why? Because geography alone doesn't guarantee loyalty. There are growing fears in Pentagon circles that if the Philippines shifts its allegiance, or simply chooses neutrality, it could block, delay, or deny Western naval access during critical regional standoffs. In a war scenario, such hesitation could tip the balance of power. In short, the West is waking up to the fact that the Philippines is no longer just an ally. It's a gatekeeper. And the locks are no longer controlled in Washington. U.S. fear of losing influence over the Philippines. For decades, the Philippines was seen as America's most reliable partner in Southeast Asia. Since World War II, U.S. military presence and political influence have been deeply embedded in Filipino affairs. From Subic Bay to Clark Air Base, the U.S. had free rein to operate in the region. Even when bases were closed in the 1990s, the psychological grip remained. But in 2025, that dominance is unraveling. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., while publicly aligned with the U.S., is also pursuing a more nuanced foreign policy. He's engaging with China, seeking stronger economic ties, and asserting Philippines' sovereignty in unprecedented ways. This balancing act, sometimes called strategic hedging, is making Washington nervous. American think tanks and intelligence reports have started floating a new term, Philippine drift. It describes the subtle but steady shift of the Philippines away from being a compliant junior partner toward becoming an unpredictable independent actor. Nationalist sentiments are rising fast. Many young Filipinos no longer see the U.S. as a benevolent protector, but as a manipulative overseer. They remember history, colonization, military abuses, and economic dependency. And they want something different. This growing independence is unsettling for a West that prefers clear allies and firm commitments. The Philippines is now viewed as a swing state, one that could tilt the entire Indo-Pacific balance with a single decision. In response, U.S. diplomats have increased visits, upped military aid, and offered economic sweeteners. But beneath the handshakes and headlines lies a deepening anxiety. What if the Philippines stop China's growing pressure, and why the West is nervous? If the U.S. is anxious, it's because Beijing is busy. China's activities in the West Philippine Sea have become increasingly aggressive. From building artificial islands to deploying Coast Guard vessels and maritime militias, Beijing has made it clear. It views the entire South China Sea as its backyard. And that includes waters well within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. But here's what the West didn't expect in 2025. Manila is pushing back hard. Under the Marcos administration, the Philippines has launched assertive naval patrols, publicly condemned Chinese encroachment, and filed multiple diplomatic protests. Even more bold, Filipino fishermen, escorted by the Philippine Navy, have returned to contested reefs once considered too dangerous. This defiance is catching the attention of U.S. and European policymakers because it increases the risk of conflict. If a single Filipino patrol boat is sunk or fired upon, it could trigger the Mutual Defense Treaty with the U.S., forcing Washington into direct confrontation with Beijing. That's the nightmare scenario. And while the West applauds the Philippines for standing up to China, it also worries. What if this small nation pulls them into a regional war they're not ready for? Meanwhile, the Philippines is building coalitions of its own, strengthening ties with Japan, Australia, and ASEAN neighbors. That's making it harder for China to isolate Manila and harder for the West to claim exclusive influence. The Philippines isn't just resisting China, it's becoming the epicenter of resistance. And for the West, that's a double-edged sword, empowering yet dangerously unpredictable. Economic surge that took everyone by surprise. While much of the world struggled with inflation, energy crises, and sluggish growth in 2025, the Philippines did something shocking. It soared. With a projected GDP growth of 6 to 7%, the country is becoming one of Asia's fastest-growing economies. But it's not just the numbers. It's how it's growing that's surprising everyone. The business process outsourcing BPO industry, once known for customer service calls, has evolved into BPO 2.0. Now, it handles everything from AI data training to fintech analytics. Filipino tech startups like Agos, Pinoy Cloud, and Bayan Data are attracting international capital. And with over 70 million internet users, the digital economy is exploding. Foreign direct investment is flooding in, particularly from companies fleeing China's rising costs and geopolitical risks. The Philippines is becoming the new manufacturing darling of Asia. with its young, English-speaking workforce and improving logistics infrastructure. Western corporations are quietly shifting operations to Filipino soil. Apple suppliers, Samsung vendors, even Tesla has begun exploring assembly options near Subic. But while they invest, they also worry about local regulatory independence, rising nationalism, and the Philippines becoming too aligned with BRICS or China in the future. This economic boom isn't just wealth, it's leverage. And for the West, that's uncomfortable. The days when they could dictate terms through aid packages or debt diplomacy, those days are fading fast. The Philippines' quiet military modernization. While media headlines focus on China's military rise and America's Indo-Pacific strategy, one development is happening under the radar. The Philippines is arming itself, and fast. In 2025, the Armed Forces of the Philippines, AFP, is undergoing the most ambitious modernization campaign in its history. With a defense budget that has doubled since 2020, the country is purchasing new fighter jets, frigates, radar systems, and missile platforms. Deals with South Korea, France, India, and even Israel have transformed its once underfunded forces into a regional military actor to be reckoned with. Brand new air bases in northern Luzon and upgraded naval ports in Palawan now serve not only as U.S. operating hubs, but as Filipino power projection zones. The AFP isn't just hosting allies anymore. It's preparing to fight its own battles. Joint military drills like Balakaden have grown in scale, now involving advanced cyber warfare simulations, amphibious assaults, and multinational task forces. The message is clear. The Philippines is no longer relying on foreign protection. It's building its own shield. But here's the part that worries the West. This modernization isn't just about external threats. It's about autonomy. Western planners are beginning to realize that a self-reliant Philippine military means Manila can say no. No to U.S. requests for expanded operations. No to automatic alliance decisions. No to being used as a pawn in someone else's war. That kind of independence changes the entire security architecture of the region. And that's why the West is nervous. An empowered Philippines doesn't just resist China. It can resist anyone, including rising nationalism and a confident new generation. Beyond geopolitics and economics, there's a quieter revolution happening. One rooted in culture, identity, and national pride. In 2025, the Filipino youth are coming of age, and they're doing it on their own terms. Unlike previous generations raised in the shadow of colonial history or Western media dominance, this new wave of Filipinos is digitally native, politically aware, and deeply proud of their heritage. From viral TikTok clips debunking Western historical narratives to YouTube channels promoting Filipino-made content and commentary, the youth are reclaiming their voice. A surge in online content challenges the once dominant Western lens on Philippine affairs. Gen Z Filipinos are now more likely to quote Jose Rizal than a U.S. president, and that shift matters. This rise in nationalism isn't just emotional, it's political. Movements calling for stronger sovereignty, territorial defense, and economic self-reliance are gaining momentum. The notion of Philippines first is no longer taboo, it's mainstream. And this cultural shift is making Western diplomats uncomfortable. Why? Because it's harder to shape or manipulate a population that knows its worth. The era of quiet compliance is over. Today's Filipinos are asking tough questions about foreign bases, foreign aid, and foreign agendas. More than ever, the Philippines is thinking for itself. And for the West, that's perhaps the most terrifying change of all. Global alliances the West didn't see coming. The traditional global order was built on predictability. The West leads and others follow. But in 2025, the Philippines is forging a path of strategic unpredictability, and that's making Washington, Brussels, and even Canberra nervous. While the U.S. still maintains its influence, Manila has begun diversifying its defense and economic partnerships. New military cooperation agreements have emerged with Japan, India, and Vietnam, creating a regional network of alliances that doesn't revolve around the West. The Philippines is also exploring energy deals with Middle Eastern powers like the UAE and Saudi Arabia, who are eager to expand their influence in Asia. Even more surprising is Manila's growing curiosity about BRICS Plus. Though not a member, the Philippines has been courted by the bloc for future energy and investment collaborations. This could shift it closer to an emerging multipolar world order, where the U.S. and its allies no longer dominate decision-making. At international forums like the UN, ASEAN, and WTO, Filipino diplomats have taken on a stronger, more independent tone. No longer content to echo U.S. positions, they're advocating for regional solutions, a rules-based order that respects smaller nations, and economic policies that protect Filipino workers, not just foreign investors. Western leaders are realizing too late that the Philippines is not just realigning. It's redefining its place in the world. And the scariest part? The West has no playbook for this kind of independence. It's used to either full allies or full rivals, not proud nations doing things their own way. Fear of the Philippine trigger in a future Pacific war. If you asked Western military analysts what could spark the next world war, many won't say Taiwan, they'll say the Philippines. The concept of the Philippine trigger has become a key concern in think tanks and Pentagon war games. The idea is simple but alarming. A small miscalculation, like a Chinese vessel ramming a Filipino boat in disputed waters, could activate a treaty response and spiral into global war. Because of the 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty, the U.S. is obligated to assist the Philippines if it comes under attack. In 2025, this treaty has taken on new weight. With Chinese harassment in the West Philippine Sea escalating and the Philippine Navy growing more confident, the risk of accidental engagement is real. And it's not just theory. In recent months, U.S. defense officials have publicly reiterated their commitment to defend the Philippines. Privately, they worry about being pulled into a conflict on terms they don't control. One explosive moment, caught on video, streamed online, could leave Washington with no choice but to retaliate. What terrifies the West isn't just that the Philippines might be attacked. It's that it might fight back before consulting its allies. In this scenario, the Philippines stops being a passive buffer and becomes an active flashpoint. That shifts the entire calculus of Indo-Pacific defense planning. The world is learning that you don't need to be a super Western media narrative versus ground reality. Despite all these seismic shifts, Western media still struggles to portray the Philippines accurately. Mainstream outlets continue to frame the country as chaotic, politically unstable, or overly dependent on foreign aid and military protection. But that narrative is falling apart. On the ground, the Philippines in 2025 is anything but fragile. It is governed by a leadership that, while controversial at times, is playing geopolitical chess, not checkers. Its armed forces are stronger. Its economy is more diverse. Its youth is engaged. And its diplomatic corps is making smart, strategic moves on the global stage. What Western media often misses or deliberately ignores is the quiet sophistication of this evolution. Headlines may focus on sensationalism, but the reality is a country calmly asserting its place in a new world order. This mismatch in perception versus reality isn't just inaccurate, it's dangerous. It leads policymakers to underestimate the Philippines or push the wrong levers of influence. It promotes outdated stereotypes rather than informed strategy. And some in the West prefer it that way. A misinformed public is easier to pacify. If people believe the Philippines is still just a dependent nation clinging to U.S. support, they won't question the true nature of Washington's fear. But in 2025, that illusion is harder to maintain. The West's quiet but strategic response. So how is the West responding to this rising power it can no longer fully control? Behind the scenes, it's not all admiration and applause. It's strategic maneuvering, sometimes even pressure. The U.S. and its allies have ramped up diplomatic visits to Manila, offering new aid packages, infrastructure deals, and expanded military cooperation. These gestures appear friendly, but they're designed to keep the Philippines aligned with Western interests. There's also a rise in classified intelligence sharing between the U.S. and the Armed Forces of the Philippines, AFP. On the surface, it's about mutual defense. But behind closed doors, some analysts believe it's a way for the U.S. to keep tabs on what Manila is really planning. Military contractors from Western nations are suddenly flooding the Philippine market, offering top-of-the-line defense tech and weapon systems. It's less about helping and more about tying the country to Western supply chains. Meanwhile, certain Filipino politicians, especially those with pro-Western leanings, are being subtly pressured to maintain traditional alliances. Funding, election support, and public endorsements are all part of the quiet influence playbook. The West knows it can't reverse the Philippines' rise, but still wants to shape it softly, subtly, and persistently. Because an entirely independent Philippines? That's not just unfamiliar. That's unacceptable. Why 2025 is the year the Philippines became a power to fear and respect. As 2025 unfolds, the Philippines is no longer a quiet archipelago tucked between global giants. It's a rising force, economically, politically, and strategically. No longer content to be a silent partner or a battlefield for others' wars, it is stepping into its own power. This transformation isn't dramatic or loud. It's methodical, and that's what makes it so profound. The West isn't afraid of the Philippines because it's aggressive. It's scary because the Philippines is finally making choices for itself. And the world can't predict what those choices will be. From the South China Sea to tech markets, from military alliances to nationalist youth movements, the country is becoming a wild card, a pivot point, a game changer. And in a world where empires prefer pawns, an independent player like the Philippines is downright terrifying. But it's also inspiring, because what we're witnessing isn't just the rise of a country. It's the rise of a people who have decided they will no longer be defined by others. They will write their own story. And now, the world must adjust. The Philippines isn't rising. It has risen. And the West knows it can't control